Hey everyone, and welcome to the Ballet and Beyond podcast, where we interview current and former professionals, teachers, patrons, and more from the world of ballet and dance. You'll get insight from top dancers and instructors in the industry, as well as local performers and educators as they talk about their experiences in the business. I'm your host today, Pete Commander. If you're from the greater Baltimore area, don't forget to check out Charm City Ballet, located in Cockeysville, where we offer classes for all dancers ages 3 through adult. Visit www.charmcityballet.com for more information on classes, auditions, and upcoming performances. This is episode 7 of Ballet and Beyond, and with us today is Goucher College professor Rick Southerland. Rick is Associate Professor of Dance at Goucher College and past president of the National Dance Education Organization. Rick spent more than 20 years teaching in pre-K through 12 dance education in North Carolina, Maryland, Georgia, Nevada, and Washington, D.C. Rick currently oversees the K-12 Dance Education Certification Program and teaches dance education, modern dance technique, composition, and study abroad courses on the African continent. Rick, thanks so much for being on with us today and doing this.
Well, thank you for having me. Anything where I can advocate on behalf of dance or using my experience to share stories so that it's further connecting the field. That's what I do.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So let's start by talking a little bit about your story. Tell us how you got into dance and then how that led you to dance education.
Well, I was second grade and my mother took me and my sister to my little cousin's dance recital that June at Trask Coliseum in Wilmington, North Carolina. And I mean, very much like out of a chorus line, my story is a lot like the guy's story in that, watching his sister, in this case, my cousin. And my mother couldn't keep me out of the middle of the aisles. I was dancing. I could do that. That's what I wanted to do. And so over time, I actually enrolled the next year, took tap and jazz. And only took it for 3 years. My parents split up, and with that comes certain sacrifices. But I was very fortunate to have grown up actually in a very arts-savvy school system at the time, near Hanover County Schools. And so I had the opportunity in the middle school to engage in theater and chorus and visual arts. I was very consistent in theater throughout both middle school and high school. I didn't do chorus in high school, and I got involved in a lot in the creative writing courses. There was dance offered when I was in high school, and I would peek in on classes. But having grown up in the South at the time and just seeing a lot of friends being treated differently because they were gay or perceived as gay or anything other, really. And so for whatever reason, I think that's why I refrained from, taking dance class in high school. Then I ended up at East Carolina University for my undergraduate degree. They have a conservatory model dance program. And at the time, so they offered a BFA. But at the time, they also offered a BA in dance education. And I thought to myself, well, two things. First, I was originally going to school for clothing construction and design because I was going to be the next Jean-Paul Gaultier. I was a Madonna fanatic, and of course, he designed for her and for many, many other famous people. But that's how I was introduced, and it inspired me. And then I noticed in college there were tap classes offered. I didn't read too deeply about that they had a dance program or anything. And I thought, well, this will be my art elective. So, I enrolled in tap. And by the second semester, they had me enrolling in all these other dance classes because I was really a guy. So,
right.
And because I also could move. I had some other abilities, where they wanted me to just start dancing. I thought to myself, well, let me do the BA in dance education because I know teaching was also something that I think was really inherent in me because I remember growing up, always playing school, and I was a teacher and making tests. And so I said, let me do the dance education. And it was really when I enrolled in that first course, it was called Perspectives in Dance Education, like a 1-credit seminar, and we would have to go into different public schools at different levels, and observe. And I just remember one day watching a high school class. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be certified K-12. And yet I recognize where I lacked, like from a technical perspective. And at that age, there's no guarantee we get a middle school or an elementary, school position. So I went and had a conversation with the director of the School of Theater and Dance. His name was John Sharon. He said, basically go do the BFA. Long term, it's going to serve you far better. And so knowing that I lacked technically, I focused in on all the composition classes. And so that's when I told and of course, started taking the modern, the ballet, the jazz, because we were required to do all of that. And then we concentrate in basically what they tell us we're going to concentrate
okay.
for our last 2 years. But I remember them telling me, they're like, we're accepting you into this BFA program because of your creative potential, not because of where you stand technically. So,
right.
That's really how I got my start. And then right after college, so I have this BFA in dance and performance and choreography. But I had a lot of friends in the school system, and my heart was not set on going to New York City at all. And so I was torn. I thought, let me work for a little bit. So I moved in with my dad, who then lived in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I had friends teaching the school system. And so they encouraged me to apply and do what was then called alternative lateral entry, which is an alternative pathway to working towards your state teacher certification. Well,
okay.
I taught that year, 4th and 5th grade, actually dance and drama in a program Wake County Public Schools used to have called the Basic Education Program, where all the elementary schools had dance and theater, as well as art and music in every elementary school. So I was what they called an itinerant teacher, meaning I only worked maybe 2 days at one school, a day and a half at another, and a day and a half at another. So I was always traveling between schools.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it so much. It scared me so much because I fell in love with teaching and with just really seeing how creative we were as children before the world and the things and the structures, that we entered through our education systems and social systems. And I'm like, oh my God, why do we just carve out the creative potential that's inherent in each and every one of us? So that was really the gut of it all for me. And then, after that first year, I left because of my first long-term boyfriend and partner who moved to San Francisco. So I quit the job after a year, went to San Francisco, and did odd jobs. And that's where I began or was exposed to West Coast release technique. First time I ever took a dance class without music. It was all about, your breath and the blood. And so that really, about how I saw technique and also performance and all that. It really kind of was a turning point. Plus, because I still love teaching too. So it informed me in so many wonderful ways. I was in San Francisco for a couple of years, ended up moving back to North Carolina to care for my father, who was fighting cancer. So me and my sister took care of him, and I remained in Raleigh, ended up getting a job back in Wake County for about another year, and then doing the same thing, teaching in the basic education program. Went back to East Carolina University. Then they had a program called Project ACT. ACT is an acronym for Alternative Certification for Teachers. This program was the model program for what we now know as Masters of Arts in Teaching in institutions around the country. So I was like in the second cohort of that, and in a year you complete your state required coursework. You have to have obviously a degree in a discipline already. And so it's just the education mandated courses, which I received at graduate level. So now I have some grad courses under my belt. Ended up getting a job teaching at Riverside High School in Durham, North Carolina, full time. I built a program there from about 50 students to almost 200 students in less than 3 years. I was very energetic and engaged. I got my students exposed to a lot of different things. I took them to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade where they performed. We were invited to perform in the halftime show at the Nokia Sugar Bowl.
Oh, wow.
They performed in the opening closing ceremonies of the 1999 Special Olympic World Summer Games that was hosted in North Carolina then. So I was always getting them to make connections and to network. That was something I always believed in. No matter how good the quality of your work is, none of it's any good if you don't go out and develop relationships. So, and of course, a lot of what I believed then and some recent research in an article that I put out, networking was one of the findings about, this idea of having an entrepreneurial orientation. So these were skill sets that somehow I don't recall specifically gaining by taking a business course or anything like that, because I certainly never took a business course. But I just discovered that. And from that, a lot of my students were able to go to great schools and do and I think a lot of it also inspired students I would have never guessed who would move forward into a dance career. Particularly many of them that I taught in high school went on to become dance educators themselves in the public schools.
Okay.
But yeah, there was that. I got my first master's degree at American University. And then later on, I was torn between getting either a PhD or an MFA because I knew after teaching elementary through high school for about 15, 16 years that I wanted to transition to higher ed, and because I believed in dance education. And so another thing that also was very central in my career path was my engagement with the National Dance Education Organization. I remember in college, we went to state conference, but it was hosted by the AFERD, which is the old School Education, Recreation, and Dance organization. When we went, there was like one dance session, and everything else was about physical education. So from an early start, because that was at that time the only dance organization represented nationally, I never got involved after that. Because I had a different perspective, I think largely because I did end up going through the BFA. So I had a very dance as an art form perspective, but because of my passion for teaching and learning, I personally felt this idea, which happens to be in the National Dance Education Organization's logo is, dance as an art form in education. And so before I left North Carolina, that's when NDEO started forming, and I've been following them. And when we got to Washington, D.C., where I began my graduate studies at American, within weeks after getting here, I was at the NDEO office introducing myself to Jane Bombright, then executive director. And one of their education program directors, Rena Faber. Next thing I know, they had me, writing up the charter for state affiliate called the Capital Region Educators of Dance Organization, Credo. And it was, I think, like the third or fourth state affiliate to the national organization. I served as charter president, helped find monies to, do a website. That organization actually just disbanded only about 5-6 years ago. When the Maryland Dance Education Association decided to do something different, and because they were involved with AFERD, had their state conferences as well as NDEO and a couple other different little dance organizations. So when Ken Krzyzewski was the Maryland Department of Education as director of the arts programming for the state, he decided to pull the organizations together. And they all had discussions and felt like, we're going to align with NDEO and do just one state organization kind of thing. So they did that.
So that was going to be my next question. Tell us a little bit about the general goals and work of the NDEO.
Well, our vision is all children have a right to dance. That's the fundamental belief. And in that, quality dance education. And in an effort to provide that, we need highly certified dance educators, whether they're in public schools, private or parochial schools, studios of dance, performing arts organizations. It doesn't matter where. And so from a public sector perspective, we have been very involved with dance standards, very early on in the 90s, and then following up, actually led the way with the new Common Core standards for the arts. And if you ever look at them, that framework and formatting, for the most part, was really appreciated and adopted by the other art forms. So, about standards, about access to dance education, what is highly qualified. And again, looking at different areas where dance education exists, we have a clear understanding of what that is for K-12 public schools by nature of what state and federal policies state for teacher credentialing. And with private studios of practice, there are a variety of ways. Historically, with private studios, most reason people started studios is because they took from their parents or they took from whoever the local, and you just had this passion. You didn't go to college. You just opened your own studio, Right. And so looking at ways to reach out, just to inform about, healthy dance teaching practices. So we're seeing the standard across the board happening with studios as far as elevating what's good and what's healthy dance. And, a shout out to Nigel Lithgow, who endorses all that NDEO does and did so, on most of his shows. So that's been helping to help bridge the gap of all and where dance is and what dance education is. It's helped allow for the private sector and the public sector come together and have conversations. Dance is just we're such a small field, and we all know our dance and how, if you do ballet, you can't do modern. If you do modern, you can't do ballet,
Right.
And if you do those, you can't do West African, and if you can't do it, and you can't do And so, and I'm kind of over who says who can do what. If you got a body, you can dance. And the other part of it too, which is part of the problem of the professional side, is yes, as an educator, I know I'm not there to create, if I have a classroom of 25 students 5 times a day, 125, 50 professional dancers. But what I am doing is sustaining an art form by also developing an audience. People who have been exposed, who understand and long term, keep putting money into the industry. And that's what I also recognize. And that's an entrepreneurial kind of mindset, to be thinking about it in that way. And that's why dance education or because I love this art form so much, for it to continue and hopefully grow, but just to simply sustain, we have to start young and continue growing the audience. And that's what is fundamental to the National Dance Education Organization, which is why I just quickly connected. It was the right feeling. And recently we just put out our new national priorities, which is cultivate leadership, building knowledge, and making connection. So, and that's sort of our 10-year plan. It's our applied strategic plan. We decided to try something different that isn't a norm for businesses. But we all know that your strategic plan is like a living, breathing document too. It's just a plan. So the way we designed it and framed it with these priorities. You know, if we're going to grow, we know we need to connect people. Part of that connection is engagement, and that engagement comes through, just all the research and information.
Right.
You know, and then out of that, the reality with most dance teachers, the kind of stress is we're all leaders. We're the only ones in that classroom with those children. We're the only ones putting a whole show together on a very basic level.
Right.
So we need to help them own that agency. They need to know how to advocate for themselves so they can get what it is that they need based on the rights that these children and this organization believes they should all have access to dance.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, I'm not happy to leave step down from it, but I'm happy at where we are.
Right.
And that I was part of some really just wonderfully dynamic work that will make a difference because of the meaning of it. It has been so meaningful, not just for me, but everybody who has been involved with the organization.
I'm going to switch gears if that's okay. So when you get new students into Goucher, you have them, give or take for 4 years. What are some of your goals for them coming through the program? What do you look for when they're coming in, and what do you hope they leave with on the way out?
Well, my personal goal is that I don't teach dance. I teach life skills, and that dance is the content through which those skills are understood. Our medium is dance. We're kinesthetic learners, so there are ways in which I can show them really in many ways what they already know through the discipline of dance and make those real world connections. So that's really what the goal is. I mean, yes, we're still training in our classrooms and the technique classrooms. We still have high expectations for them to really push beyond their boundaries through the composition courses and in their academic writing through dance. And, what I appreciate about being at a liberal arts school is that we're able to help them understand how all the classes, whether they're of the dance discipline or not, are really a lot more interrelated than they realize. So I know that whoever leads our program, they're all not going to become performers. And certainly they're all not going directly into the top ballet companies as soloists. But what they do know, and I hope those life skills, and in large part because of some of the research I uncovered in my entrepreneurial orientation work, was how to take what you know and be able to communicate that in effective ways, and how to do that so that they are able, if they can't get the work they want, they know how to create the work they want.
Okay. Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
one thing, you know, I do keep encouraging our dance students to do, and I can't imagine any dance professional at any stage or level or educator could argue they all need to take a basic pedagogy class. They all somehow, somewhere, some way, someday, especially for a quick buck, might be asked to teach a master class.
Right.
And you should know how to design a fundamentally decent class so that it's of good quality, so that one, you get invited back. Two, on a personal note, for Goucher, we know we've done our job.
Oh, right.
You know, but teaching is not as scary as everybody thinks, you know, and I can also understand, particularly our students who come in are just so performance geared, how frightening it is to be telling people what to do rather than to be told what to do.
Oh, right.
You know, and I'm not saying that. That's just, you know, not always the truth, but they become challenged to transition into a more leadership and more vocal role. So.
Okay. So are there things that you feel like higher education and dance could be doing better? And if so, what are some of those things?
Well, one, stay ahead of the time with this shift in higher education across the board. A couple of things. One, you know, we're going to see many, many more, particularly small private colleges closing in the next 7 to 10 years. There's going to be continued downsizing. It's going to have with the growing trend of community colleges, you know, becoming free. You're even going to see the 4-year institutions that are public institutions be impacted by that. What's been interesting data I've come across, though, is a lot of arts programs have been popping up more and more in higher ed. So I'm not sure what that is and what that means yet. And I'm kind of happy I am happy to hear that, but I'm not going to speculate.
Right.
But we need to understand who our demographics are. We know, particularly Goucher, that is changing rapidly. Our learners are different every year as a result of technology. Every year, I can tell a small difference of the student incoming classes from this year to the incoming class from the year prior. So we need to constantly be tooled. I know particularly for colleges like Goucher, we are a teaching college. Yes, we do research, but I think that we need to think more deeply about how we think about our research. So if we want to go do that choreography, we need to include the pedagogical aspect to it so that we are developing ourselves as professor teachers, because we're not like other institutions where, okay, you're going to be in Professor Yadada's class, but the class is actually being taught by the graduate assistant. And at Goucher, their promise is that you're taught by the professor, you know. And so we're a teaching college and we're feeling some growing pains as a college, and we're jumping on board with a lot of professional development initiatives on our campus so that we can maintain the high quality of the teaching that we do provide for our students at Goucher. And so that it helps us improve our teaching, you know, and how we teach, and helps us rethink and reframe some things that aligns with, of course, the expectations of Goucher, but also really does align with much of what we're already doing in the field.
Right. Okay. I'm going to switch gears one more time, if that's okay, and talk a little bit about CCB, actually. I guess that was 4 years ago. We came to you and asked you to be a part of Beauty and the Beast. And since then, you've become what Beck and I think of as a crucial and irreplaceable part of CCB and what we're doing. And for lack of a better way of asking it, Why did you end up agreeing to do that? And what about this type of performance do you think was worth your time to take to do that?
I did it really, in retrospect, for very personal reasons. Because I love the performing arts, obviously. So from a professional perspective, was my age consideration and how much longer will I be able to do? Because I teach modern dance and I'm always upside down and on my back. So I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to be upside down and on my back and doing what I do in that form. So I thought, these are character roles. It will require something different of my body, but also something I've always believed in. You know, as a dance instructor, professor, particularly in, technique classes and watching students perform, it's like everything's beautiful but their face. It's like, y'all, there's such a disconnect. What's going on there? Where's the emotion in the face? And a lot of that comes from my own background, being in theater, of course, all through middle and high school. And right. I have a minor in theater, to go along with my BFA. And I had to take some acting classes and perform straight acting as well. So I picked up a few things along the way. And of course, all of my favorite dances I have ever seen is in large part because of the expression on their faces as connected to the rest of the body. I could see the whole body when the face is connected. So for me, it was an opportunity to get back into my fine motor muscle self, because I'm having to look at physical details in such a different way. What is my facial? Because I'm not speaking. This is a ballet. And I am these different characters. So part of it is me doing also some research, do a little reading. Fortunately, the stories that I've done for them, I've seen since I was a child, or,
right.
Beauty and the Beast and Little Mermaid, when they were so popular in the 90s, I was teaching elementary and I used that stuff and watched those movies in the classroom, So a lot of that was my own experience and my perception of who these characters were over time. Doing, again, reading a lot. I'm a very visual person, and also having been a dance teacher for so long, my physical observation skills, especially if it's still life, just looking at how they're holding their hand, that fingertip, the eyebrow, just all those fine details. So I look at a lot of pictures. I'll go back and look at particularly playing the role of Scrooge. I'll go and each year kind of look at a different movie that had that character in it, see, something else I might pick up. But yeah, it's hard work. The easy parts of it is when I'm doing the set choreography that you and Becca put on me.
Right.
On my body. Having to hold your character and muscular, in a particular way. And it isn't just one space. It isn't the gross motor, which is about bigger, longer lines. It's all those tiny muscles in those funky spaces in our bodies that you have to pay attention to in order to find that physical demeanor of that character you're portraying.
So, speaking of character, you've played a very wide range of characters for us, and you had mentioned it's ballet, so that you're not using your voice. What are some of the things that you think about while you're developing and practicing these characters?
Well, I think about the storyline a lot. I think about the other characters in space. I think about the place. Because I I work to find the authenticity in that moment so that every time I'm on that stage in that scene, I try to keep it at a natural space so that I'm acting and reacting and not, put on a recording.
Right.
Not being my own corps de ballet so that every night, every performance is identical to every night and that's never been the case. For me in that situation, I have stage directions and I know roughly where I need to be as it related to others. But what actually ends up coming out of my body, yes, I get into character and I hold myself, and we know it's live theater too. So there might be other, unexpected, obstacles. So I see that I'm always dealing in unexpected obstacles. So it has that kind of improvisatory thing that helps keep it fresh, especially for me. When you're on stage, 90% of a show in the role of Scrooge, and I'll say 50% of that time you're just standing there under a light.
Right.
That is really the hardest thing in the world, to be in character. So I'm constantly having conversations in my mind, even if other people are there, trying to and respond to them as though I'm sort of talking to myself. And I also know that I have to, other thing, so that the fine motor, movement, material, all this detail does get noticed, there is a certain level of engagement of the gross motor, muscles that you have to involve. It's kind of like projecting your voice to the audience. So you have to it's like you're carrying yourself and then you're over carrying. So there's this slight, I don't know how else to say it or express it, but it's kind of an area I'm fascinated with in terms of movement and the idea of projection.
Mm. So you do all this work to stay in character, and you and I have talked a little bit about the sort of power that's behind a character like Scrooge and a story like A Christmas Carol, and obviously, Dickens was a genius, but talk a little bit about why a story like this is so important and why you feel like it's so important to embody this character the way that you do.
For me personally, on many levels, one is a gay man who's always kind of had to go down my own pathway, feeling like I'm alone in the world. I think having had experienced multiple times significant loss in my life that has shifted my direction. And out of all of that, just kind of threw me into some very deep, dark places. And fortunately, friends or things here and there happened so that the light came and kind of pulled me out each time. I see this as, I think right now, more than anything, this is a story about a white heterosexual male who is at the top of his world. And because of circumstances that he felt like he couldn't control, and he knew he had to suppress his feelings and all of this anger inside, and that over time he became this alone, miserly, person. And, what the story represents is an opportunity and demonstrates the ability we all have. Is called reflection, and productive reflection, and towards our ability as humans to be actually self-inspiring by our own stories, to kind of pull ourselves from the bottom, clear the slate, and start over in a lighter way, in a more positive way. understanding what it means to forgive the self, understanding really what identity is, and that in this situation and the way I see it, in this current political, social, and cultural climate we're dealing, it's about trying to strip away identities that perhaps we really aren't. And that's what I appreciate about this story, particularly right now, that it's an opportunity to say, I am human. I am a successful human who's made mistakes, but who sees through all of this and is going to do differently, is going to consciously make efforts because he recognizes he does need people. He recognizes that power for the individual is by empowering those around you, not disempowering, not disenfranchising, not being corrupt, not being stingy and greedy, but the power is in the people all around us. And that's what this story represents. This straight, white male, very Christian, obviously, because this is a Christian-based story, who grew up and saw the real picture of the world around him. And the only way we see those pictures is by dealing with the world inside of ourselves.
This episode was brought to you by Charm City Ballet. If you live in the greater Baltimore area, don't forget to check out Charm City Ballet located in Cockeysville. Visit www.charmcityballet.com for information on classes, auditions, and upcoming performances. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and give Ballet and Beyond a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. For questions and guest requests, please email us at balletandbeyondpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your host, Pete Commander. Thanks for listening.